Trapped in a transit zone for more than 3 weeks, the former American intelligence contractor Edward Snowden has asked for asylum in Russia, a prospect the US State Department has just said would raise concerns. Snowden, who's been on the run since he leaked details of America's vast electronic surveillance program, met human rights activists at Moscow airport today, insisting he had no regrets. Live now to our Washington correspondent, Matt Fry. Matt.
Well, you said it, John. He has asked for temporary asylum in Russia. I think overall he's asked for asylum in more than 20 countries. And so far, 3 have said that they would indeed take him. Now, it's interesting. The administration has been very critical of the Russians in granting him what they call a propaganda stage today, that behind the closed doors meeting with human rights officials, there was no press conference afterwards. You might argue that it wasn't much of a propaganda coup for Snowden himself. You could also argue that it's a little bit rich, this criticism, coming from a country that cherishes, indeed worships, in its constitution, the freedom of speech. Moscow airport, not exactly a place where you want to park your toothbrush indefinitely. So spare a thought, if you must, for the man stuck in asylum transit for a month now. No, not him. Him! Edward Snowden, the spy who leaked. He's been a busy man, firing off scores of asylum applications and today meeting with human rights officials at the airport to try and get temporary asylum in Russia. We spoke to one of them.
He wants to travel to Latin America straight away, but he does not have that possibility. He is saying that the United States are impeding his freedom of movement, and therefore his only choice at the moment is to ask Russia for assistance.
This grainy, mute mobile phone footage shows him in good health. And today, a fresh stump of leaks is a reminder of the assertion he made in the only interview to date.
The NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. It collects them in its system, and it filters them, and it analyzes them, and it measures them, and it stores them for periods of time, simply because that's the easiest, most efficient, and most valuable way to achieve these ends.
Some personal information you're happy to share online.
And that includes tapping the biggest software company in the world, which recently tried to reassure you and me with this ad.
The lines between public and private may never be perfect, but at Microsoft, your privacy is our priority.
According to the latest leak, Microsoft went one step further than other internet giants by handing the NSA the encryption keys to its email traffic and to Skype, which Microsoft bought a year ago. In other words, so far this is the most blatant example of cooperation between Silicon Valley and the intelligence services. Microsoft said today that what it did was required by law and did not involve any blanket surveillance. So far, the biggest casualty in all this is trust, ours and the government's.
FBI, let me see your hand. FBI, hands.
The government has a new internal enemy, the geek with a grudge. Just watch this in-house FBI video.
What just occurred to me, the number of times he would change his screen as I would walk into his office.
So Edward Snowden is on the run, Bradley Manning, the private behind WikiLeaks, is in court, and the veteran spy master like Michael Hayden is exasperated.
What kind of sense of moral superiority does it take to feel like your moral judgment trumps the moral judgment of not one but 2 presidents, both houses of Congress and bipartisan majorities in both houses of Congress, the American court system, and 35,000 of your co-workers at NSA?
But not the judgment of the American public, the majority of which thinks of Snowden as a whistleblower, not a traitor. And yet public opinion is unlikely to sway an administration that has been going after leakers with a vengeance.
So now, Matt, you said that the Americans would be very unhappy about any kind of asylum being granted by Moscow. So how much pressure do you think they're likely to apply?
Well, John, if you could listen into the phone lines, I'm sure the NSA is, between American embassies and Latin American capitals, or indeed Washington and Latin American capitals, you could practically hear the ringing of arms, the twisting of arms, as America has been applying the pressure. One example, President Correa of Ecuador, a left-leaning president who's turned America baiting into a bit of a national sport in the past, has buckled under American pressure as they basically called him out and said, if you take this guy on board, if you give him asylum, you will be in big trouble and we will never forget this. And now he is no longer offering asylum to Edward Snowden, as had originally been deemed possible by his own foreign minister just a few weeks ago. So what that leaves you is Nicaragua, Bolivia and Venezuela, who've all offered asylum to Edward Snowden. But to be honest, I don't get the impression that their heart's really in it. I mean, for instance, Evo Morales, who's the president of Bolivia, is of course outraged that his plane was diverted and searched by European officials because they thought that Snowden might be on board, and he's turned that into a big issue. But it's not exactly Hugo Chavez of old, the late Hugo Chavez, declaring rhetorical war against America and flying out to Moscow himself to pick him up and get him back to Venezuela and roll out the red carpet. That so far has not happened.
Matt Fry in Washington. Krishnan.